Okay, um, I'm going to assume that a lot of you guys are familiar with ICM concepts so far. If not, I will just give you a quick overview. Um, Basically, ICM stands for Independent Chip Model, and is a model that has been used for players over the years to estimate the stacks value in tournaments because well, if you're in a cash game table, right, every single chip you have has a direct dollar value. So if you have $100 in chips, you have $100 cash. It's the same. You can just move off your table and cash those chips. But since you cannot cash tournament chips, and the reward that you get in the tournament is based on the position you finish with the tournament, then the chips value is not directly proportional to the dollar amount, right? Here I have a very simple example, and this one is actually one of my book examples from Modern Poker Theory. Imagine a sit and go, 10 players sit and go, where each player paid $10 to register. Let's ignore rake for now. So if each player pays $10, you have 10 players, the total price is $100. Now, in a 10 max, 10 players sit and go, only 3 players will pay. First player will get $50. Second place will get 30, and third player will get $20 for 20% of the prize pool. Fourth place will not get any money, right? So let's say each player starts with 8,000 chips for this tournament, and if you have 4 players left, with the chip leader having 6,000 chips, so massive chip leader, you have second place in chips having 1,800, 1,200, and 1,000 chips. Here in the ICM calculator, I can just go back, I think, yeah. In this website, holdingresources.net, ICM calculator /ICM calculator, you can just enter the stack sizes in the price pool and then just calculate, and it will give you the results. So here we can easily see how if the chip leader has 60% of the chips in play, but the dollar amount of his stack is only $40. So his stack can never be worth more than the first place, right? Because because the tournament will not end here. If this was a cash game, he could just walk away from the tables and cash his chips for 60% of the money, which will be $60, right? But given ICM, the ICM model, this calculator, what it does is it simulates based on the player's chip stack, the likelihood that they end up in a certain position, assigns some weights, and then gives the estimated dollar value to each one of the players' stacks. So here the chip leader stack is only worth $40, and something that is really interesting is that the shorter stack here, he only has 1,000 chips, right? But his stack size is worth $16, not $10, because he still has a shot at cashing or even win the tournament. If he doubles up a couple times, he can just get there and become the chip leader or end up winning the tournament. So even though he's a shorter stack, and he only has 1,000 chips, which is about the starting stack, his stack right now with 4 players left is worth $16, so a lot more than the total chips he has. And well, this helps also simulate the value of something that is the tournament life, right? The value of still being alive in the tournament. That's a lot of value in that, and a lot of players sometimes disregard that. So understanding this, how the GPV value is different than the dollar value of the stacks, will help you make better decisions when you are at a final table playing for potentially tons of money. Now, there is a lot of content regarding ICM pre-flop, and I can give you a few examples of that, of how tighter their rejamming ranges can get for some situations when you compare those to GPB and ICM. But what I will really like to focus on, hammer on here, is in the theory of defending your big blind, and how you have to be a lot tighter to defend your big blind when there is ICM involved, when you are a short stack or a middle stack. And well, so I want to divide this ICM lecture into two main categories. So first, in this one, as I generally do, I will be discussing a little bit about the theory behind the situations. And then for the second part, which is going to be next week, I would like to go over actual hands and then present to you guys the practical applications of the theory. So first section will be theory, and second section will be the practical applications, right? So let me see if there are any more questions so far regarding ICM. Okay, let's bring the calculator. So now this is the paid version of the calculator. So for example, if we set up a very basic situation with players having 10 big blinds. Okay. This one. No antes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Let's make it 900. Oh. 0. By the way, these calculations are typically very, very fast. It's going to take just a couple seconds. Okay. So here, what I did was just give each player 10 big blinds. And well, now the calculator will give us the range each player can jam from each position, assuming there is no ICM involved, for 10 big blinds. Now let's do the exact same thing, but this time let's change the model from GPB to ICM. And here, let's just make it with the same price pool we had before, 50, 30, 20. Okay, now, for example, under the GAN, in a pure GPP environment, if they all have the exact same stack, he can shove 9.6% hands. And if we add the ICM, now not only, well, he can jam less hands, only 8.9% compared to 9.6%, but also the shape, the general shape of the range he can jam changes. So less pairs, and now it's going to be more blocker oriented. And the blockers become more relevant for jamming when you are in an ICM situation, because you want to make it less likely that you get called. So you want to have more fold equity, right? Things change in such a way when there's ICM involved, so that now you are not looking to flip and double up, hopefully, right? You're mostly looking to get folds. And so that's why the shape of the range changes. And you can see here that with GPV, from UTG, you can jam 9s and 8s, right? 7s is like neutral EV, zero EV, 6s is generally very close. So 6s and 7s are like indifferent. You can jump or just fold, probably just fold because you're not really making money with them. Then pocket 8s is also very low value that you're making. So you can just go with 9s plus a few broadways, right? But then changing OTG to the ICM simulation, now you can no longer any longer go all in with these suited broadways and with these pairs. You're not just making enough money with those, because again, what you're looking is to mostly improve your fold equity, just get more folds. Now, this affects very heavily what is the pushing ranges, and also affects even more the calling ranges, right? Because what you have to decide when you are calling in an ICM situation or pushing is this. This is going back to the ICM calculator here. So, for example, you could just go back here and be like, okay, if I win and double up, right? So against this player, then my stack is, so let's say, for example, that this player wants to call this guy. So if he calls, okay, let's say this, for example, the small blind 1200, big blind is 1000, so small blind pushes on the big blind, right? Now, the big blind has to think, okay, well, if I win, if I call and win, right, my stack is going to be worth, let's actually go back here and take a screenshot so we can okay, let's take a screenshot here so we can use it later. Okay, now let's imagine this is a cutoff button, small blind, big blind. The small blind jams into the big blind. Now the big blind has to decide if the call is worth it or not. Okay, so what he will have to do is think this way. Well, if I call, I will double up my stack to 2000, and the other player will be left with 200, right? So now the stack of the player in the big blind will go from a value of $16 to a value of $28. So that's actually pretty good. He's doubling up his he's not doubling up his let's bring the calculator here. So 16.24 times 2. Okay, he's doubling his stack, but he's not doubling his chip value, right? So the chip value now is getting to, if he had double, it will be 32.48, but he's only getting a new stack value of 28.23 chips, which means that he is not doubling, even though he's doubling his stack and he's the shorter stack, he's not doubling his equity in the price pool. And this is really important to understand it, right? So you cannot call the exact same range that you would call if there were no ICM involved, because you're making less than the total chip value. So the chips that you're winning, in some sense, are worth less than the chips that you're risking, because, well, you're risking $16, $16.24. Well, if you are playing a cash game, you will be risking $16 to win $32. So exactly the chips that you are risking will be valued exactly the same with the chips that you will be winning. But here you're risking 16 and you're not making that. So you're making only 28. So 28.23 minus 16.24. So in reality, you're only making about $12. Right, and so even though you're winning another 1,000 chips, so the 1,000 chips that you're winning are worth only $12, and the 1,000 chips that you're risking are worth $16. In that sense, the chips that you're risking are worth more than the chips that you could win, because you're risking your tournament life, right? If you bust the tournament, you have 0 chips, and now your equity in the prize pool is exactly 0. And this is why you have to be very tight when somebody has you covered. Now, this is being very well discussed for pre-flop, but what I want to get is into defending your big blind, and I've seen a lot of mistakes even from professional poker players who keep defending their big blinds very wide in ICM situations when they shouldn't. So let's look into an example here. Let's go back. So let's just minimize a few things. So imagine this is a 900 table. Imagine this is the final table of a tournament. Now also, there will be some differences if the prize pool is very top heavy, or if the prize pool is not too top heavy. So if there is a more progressive, if the pay jumps are not that large between one position and the next one, so in a sense you have to be you get to risk more when the prize pool is more top heavy. You get to be more aggressive, but I will get into that later. So imagine the situation where, well, under the gun raises, and for 20 big blinds to the mean raise, action falls around to the big blind. And now, according to this GTO solution, the big blind can call about 67% hands. Now we can look at this in Pios-Holberg charts. This is probably easier to visualize. All the hands in green are the hands that the big blind gets to call in a pure GPV situation for 20 big blinds effective stacks against under the gun and a 100 table. So hands like Jack 7 will be sometimes called, sometimes fold. It's not a big deal. You can do either. A hand like 9-7 will always be a call, for example. Now, let's take a step back here, and can some of you guys tell me what are the pot odds? How much equity does the big blind need to be able to call here in theory if you will look at pot odds only? Can some of you guys in the chat make that calculation? So you will be calling one big blind for a pot of 5.7. We have a couple answers here. The correct answer is 18%, about 18%. Yeah, something like that, 17 point some. So we can make it very quickly here, another calculator. So you just have to divide 1 by 5.7, 17.5%. So times 100, 17.5%. This is what you, the total equity you will need in theory to call here, right? But let's check out something in an equity calculator first. Okay, so I'm given early position here, the range from Monker solver, the exact same range. If we look at here in Monker, in the solver, let's go back. Under the gun is folding 84% hands and is raising these hands, about 16% hands. So given this exact same range to the under the gun player and giving all hands to the big blind, we can look at the heat map and see exactly the equity. So if you look at a hand like 7-2 offsuit, for example, according to the equity calculator, this hand has 26.6% equity against under the gun range. Okay, but if we look at the GTO solution, 7-2 is a clear fold. And we're folding even way stronger hands like Jack 6. Let's look at Jack 6 suited. Jack 6 suited, you have 29.7%. Okay, okay, let's see. Can some of you guys in the chat tell me why do you think the solver is folding some of these hands even though it has the pot odds to call? I'm looking at the big blind versus under the gun, so that's what I'm looking here. So this is UTG raises, big blind defend, or we can look at it here. UTG raises, action falls around to the big blind. And the big blind, according to this, will be calling about this range. And hands like 7-2 and all of these hands are folded. Okay, yeah, correct. So we have a few correct answers here, even with no ICM exactly. So this is before ICM. This is the consciousness that I want to create here. So even before ICM, you cannot call with those hands because exactly you cannot realize enough equity. So you will have the raw equity. If your total stack was 2 big blinds and the call was an all-in for one more big blind, you have to call with any 2 cards because now you have equity. You have the right equity with any hand, even with hand like 7-2 off. So you just have more than enough equity to call, see all 5 cards, and realize your equity. But since you will not be all in, you have to call, and then you have to play post flop. And then in some flops you will be check folding, check calling, and whatever. Sometimes you will connect a strong hand, but your opponent will have a stronger hand than yours. And sometimes you will hit a very good hand, and your opponent will not give you action. So there are some accounting for all the possibilities post flop. It's just your hand will not be able to realize its equity often enough, and therefore all those hands are folded. So before solvers, players were actually making a lot of mistakes defending the big blind with any 2 cards, pretty much just calling everything because they just thought that they had the equity, but they don't. So now that we have solvers, we can see that okay, some hands are have to be folded because they're just so bad that they will not flop something strong often enough. Now, to help visualize this, let's look at, okay, I have some interesting software here that maybe you have seen before, maybe not. So this is called the flop inspector. Okay, so what I did here is just you can put a hand, let's say clubs and 6 of diamonds. And you can calculate the hand equity against the range. Okay, I gave the opponent the OTG range, so same range as we have been using here. And what I did is I created some groups of flops. So for example, in some flops with this hand against that range, you will flop over 75% equity. And in some flops, you will flop 50 to 75% equity. In some flops, you will flop a hand that only has 33 to 50% equity. And in some flops, you will flop a very trash hand will have between 0 and 33% equity. So here, this software shows us a pie chart. And here we can clearly see how we are only, with a hand like A6 offsuit, only going to flop a strong hand about 3% of the time. Then about 23% of the time, we will flop a good hand with 50 to 75% equity against the villain range. 21% of the time, 22% of the time, we flop a weak hand, let's say a 6 something middle pair or some sort of draw. And then more than 50% of the time, we flop trash. So when you flop trash, you're just going to be check folding a ton. It's very difficult to do something when you flop a less than 32% equity because you're gonna have like ace high in some boards, and even if you have a worse hand than ace high, let's say you have some jack six right now, it's even worse. Let's just give this. Okay, so if you have a hand worse like jack six, now you're flopping trash 66% of the time, which is insane. And so defending your big blind with hands that have so little playability, that's a concept that I use in my book. Playability means could be a strength, hand strength. So a couple high cards could be connectivity. You don't have any connectivity, you don't have suitedness, you don't have a straight connectivity, and you have one high card, one low card. So your hand is going to be likely dominated a lot of the time against your opponent range. Jordan asked if you can get the same information from Flopzilla. Well, not this, because of the way it shows you in how many flops you flop different amounts of equity. I think this is really important because it really helps you visualize, okay, what is going to happen after you click call. So how is your equity distributed, right? And okay, let me see if there are more questions that I need to answer. 6%. Okay. Okay. Yeah, Equilab has some equity graphs. You can look at it differently. I can show it to you here. So let's see here with the equity chart. What you can do is calculate the hand versus range equity, right? And then you just put the hand and it just shows you a graph, but it just shows you a line, and you can see it but from the line what the in what slope you have what. But well, this actually is going to show you their hand versus range equity of the entire range that has a random hand. But basically, this is what Equilab has. So, okay. Going back here to Flop Inspector. With this, we can very easily visualize how our equity is going to be distributed. So a hand like Jack 6, you are just 65% of the time, 66% of the time, you will just be, so 2/3 of the time almost, you'll be just check folding because you have nothing. You cannot defend. Even if your opponent has, is bluffing, let's say your opponent has 10-8 suited, whatever, and the flop is ace king queen. You have Jack high, he has 10 high, but his range is strong that he's just going to check. You're going to check, he's just going to bet, and you are going to have to fold your hand. Even though you're ahead of the opponent's actual hand, even though you still have a gut shot or whatever, you're just not going to see the turn and river often enough to justify it. Even sometimes the flop could be something like ace queen 6, right? And then your opponent maybe bet the flop, you can maybe check call flop, and then you're just going to just check fold the turn every single time again. So even if you flop a weak hand, you're going to be pushed of your equity so frequently. So this software has something really cool. Okay, maybe with Flopzilla Pro you can see this. So here you can see the we can set up the exact same situation. So calling one big blind to win 6.7, sorry, 4.7 before the call. Let's just calculate again. Okay, so according to this, well, the required equity 4.7, 5.7 will be the pot that you're getting, yeah, 17.5, and you're realizing with your hand, according to this Jack 6, you're realizing 29% equity. But let's go back to equity realization. So this here, for example, okay, let's see, for example, here, okay, let's remove here a few of these categories. This helps us visualize things a bit better. Okay, so with a hand like Jack 6, these are the flops where you flop a strong hand. So Queen Jack 6, you flop 2 pairs. Jack 6-2, you flop 2 pairs. 6-6-6, of course, you flop quads. 6-6-5, you flop trips. King 6-6, you flop trips. So it's about 3%. There are only like ace jack jack, you flop trip jack. So only a few flops where you actually flop a strong hand. Let's see the flops where you flop a good hand. Flop Inspector is actually free. It's very useful for visualizing these things. I like to use it a lot to conceptualize these things, these concepts. You can go to flopinspector.com, I believe. Flopinspector.com. Here. You can download it. You can donate if you want. It used to be a paid software. I actually paid for 2 licenses, and then I found that it is free now. And it seems like I have too many things in my computer is gonna crash. So maybe this thing already crashed. Nope. Yeah, I think it's gonna crash. Okay, I have another window here, so let's bring the other one. Let's shut this one. Okay, here. So Jack of clubs, 6 of diamonds, and okay, range. Okay, let's open your project ICM. Okay, beautiful, it works now. Okay, now here with Jack 6 of clubs. Okay, now we can see all of the flops where we have a good hand. So we have a good hand in something like Queen Jack 2, but then it will be difficult, even in a flop like Queen Jack 2, it will be difficult for us to realize our equity. We can check call flop. Imagine turn is an ace, a king, or even the river is an ace or a king. The villain can put so much pressure on us. Imagine a flop like ace jack 6, right? Here we flop 2 pairs, but then the 2 pairs can be counterfeited easily. In a flop like ace jack 7, monotone, for example, we're gonna have a good hand because we have the 6 of clubs, for example. So when we have like a middle pair and a flush draw, there are so little situations when we are like super happy with our hand. Some king jack X, 9-6, for example. All of these flops where we flop good equity, which is 50 to 75% equity. We're talking about 16, 17% flops, and the board is going to change in future streets. So it will be so difficult for a hand as weak as this one. Oh yeah, okay. Matt is asking for a good way to memorize this, and I will give you the takeaways at the end, and that's what you should be using in game, right? So, and in also what I'm explaining effectively here, the important thing is to look at your hand, right, and be like, well, try to visualize. Let's remove the group. Try to visualize this and think, okay, given the playability of the hand, so the more connected the hand is, the more high card value the hand has, and the more suitedness. So those are the main things to look for in your hand. How connected it is, if it is suited, or if it has high card value, right? A hand like as disconnected as this one will happen will present a very similar situation where you have a ton of flops where you just miss, and then very few flops where you flop something. And this is something that amateur players struggle a lot because they like pretty hands. Let's say even a hand like 5-6 that is connected. Okay, so 6 of clubs, 5 of diamonds. So this hand is a lot more connected, right? Even with a hand as connected as this one, you are gonna flop trash 57% of the time. So what I want you two guys to think about is, okay, what happens when you are at a final table and the chip leader raises, or somebody who has you covered, to a min raise, and you're like, okay, I have 5-6 from the big blind. I will defend. I have 7-5. I have all of these hands, right? Just think, how often are you really going to be able to realize your equity? And particularly if the player has you covered. So when the player who's raising has you covered, now the entire dynamic is even worse than what I just showed you, because, well, in GPV environments, you might be able to call for 3 streets for second pair, right? But when you are a middle stack in a 900 final table, and let's say there are a couple short stacks, couple guys with 10 big blinds, and you can just wait them out and move up in the page, jumps in the ladder a little bit, then the chip leader, the guy who has you covered, can put so much pressure on you that even when you flop a decent hand, like a middle pair or something, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to be a hero, right? You just cannot play as effectively. You have to be very careful. You cannot check raising as a bluff. You cannot float him. Let's say you flop a couple overcards in some boards. You might be able to, in a GPV environment, check raise when you have a straight draw, flush draw, backdoor, straight draw, backdoor flush, or something like that. You might not be able to check raise as a bluff as often when you are at the final table and your opponent can bust you, right? So, what I want you guys to visualize here is just how difficult would it be for you not only to play pre-flop, but also to play post-flop, right? Because, well, looking at this, is very evident. Let's see, for example, in the pure GPV environment, in the preflop calculator, the small blind can shove 10 big blinds against the big blind 58% of his hands. So a lot of hands are very profitable. Here, 58.6. The difference, okay, but the big blind can only call, okay, the small blind can shove. He only has to worry about the big blind, and in the GPV environment, the big blind can call 37.4% hands. But in the ICM situation, the big blind can only call 28.2% hands. So all of this pre-flop is a lot simpler to kind of understand. Like, yeah, you just cannot call as tight as loose when your tournament life is at stake. But what I want you guys to see is that even if your opponent is raising a small bet size, like a min raise, you also have to be very careful, and you just cannot defend your big blind as wide, because, yeah. So basically, we can be more accurate and realize our equity. It says, yes, exactly. So you need to look for hands that will be more likely to get to showdown. So hands that will flop good draws or strong hands. That's what you should be looking for. And even, yeah, so the main takeaway from here is that even if your opponent goes for a min raise, right, you cannot defend your big blind as wide. And even if you have charts, let's say you get access to some GTO charts or whatever, or you just know that you can defend very wide, or somebody told you that, defend your big blind, defend your big blind, defend your big blind. Once you are in an ICM situation, you just cannot defend your big blind as wide, particularly if your opponent has you covered. Okay, now let's look back at Flop Inspector here. And okay, going to the equity calculation. So here, for example, the EV calculation. With a hand like 6-5, let's go back to our Jack 6, maybe 6. So in a GPV environment, we call $1 for 470, total pot of 570, just as here, right? Here in the equity calculation. So let's see, if you were going to realize 100% of your equity on all the possible different types of flops where you flop different sorts of equity. So 100. So here, this is the equity realization percentage. So let's say you realize 100% of your equity across all flops, where we already saw that's very difficult. Let's go back again and look at the flops where you flop trash. So you flop trash in ace queen 4. What do you do with jack 6 on ace queen 4? Just check fold. What do you do on queen 7-7? Check fold. What do you do on even 8-5-3? You have jack 6. Probably just check fold. So this is 63% of the flops. You flop trash, you're gonna check fold. Now the let's use some groups. The direct pot odds assume again 100% equity realization. So you realize 100% of your equity on each one of these flops, which we already know is not true, right? So let me just load another flop inspector over here. Okay, so I got these equity realization factors from GTO solutions, and on average we are going to only well, if we flop a really strong hand, we will over realize equity, and as you can see here, you can realize as much as 240%. So yeah, sometimes we flop a monster and we double up, right? We win the pot plus I double up or whatever. So we just over realize your equity and you make 240% equity realization. But again, this makes only 3% of flops. So even though sometimes you flop a monster, it's just not really gonna be worth it because of how little frequency this happens. Only 3% of the flops where you flop a really strong hand. Now, good hands. What happens when you flop a good hand? Well, yeah, when you flop a good hand that has 50 to 75% equity, you will realize about 91% of your total equity, which is also pretty good. So 91%. Now, weak hands, you have 33 to 50% equity. Here, you're only going to realize 40%. So not so good. 40. And when you flop trash, you probably only gonna be realizing about 8% of your equity. Now, this is according to GTO solvers, right? So this is assuming that you play perfectly post flop, and nobody plays perfectly. So even if you, these are the numbers if you were a GTO bot, right? So if we use these numbers and go back to our calculation here, now the call is only making 0.12 chips, a lot less than if we realize 100% of our equity. What happens if, well, you are not going to be playing perfectly? So maybe you are not going to be good enough or capable of extracting the 240% from your really strong hands. Maybe
Also, your opponent will not be aggressive enough when there is an obvious, situation with your flop trips or something like that. So maybe you're only going to be able to get 180%. Maybe from your good hands, you cannot get 91% and you can only get 80%. Maybe from your weak hands, you can get like 33%. And from your trash, it's almost impossible to get anything, right? So let's say you get like 0%. Now, if we again go ahead and do the calculations here, now the call is minus EV. Okay, so yeah, what really matters is not only how much equity we have and how good of a price you're getting. What is really important is to be able to visualize how often are you just going to be calling pre-flop, then check folding flop, right? Or even worse, you call pre-flop, then you call turn, and then you just fold river, and you had 20 big blinds, you end up losing one big blind front pre-flop. You call for another 2 or 3 big blinds on the flop, and now you, instead of 20, now you have 16 big blinds, so you will be in a push or fall situation for the next hand. And again, all of these things, I see even a lot of good professional players, regulars, making these mistakes, calling with so many very wide hands. Another way to visualize this is in Power Equilab. So again, we put the same range for DG player and give a random hand here. A total range equity will have 35%. We look at the heat map. And yeah, so well, we can use something called a playability profile, and this will adjust to how much equity players can actually realize. There are some built-in playability profiles or offsets in Power Equilab. You can also make your own. I included some of these based from GTO solutions in my book. If you haven't, you can just create them here and add them. So for add a position, and now, okay, let's see if you can see the change. So for example, look at 6-2 offsuit. So you have 27.5% equity. If we apply the profile now, we only have 19%, right? So again, if we choose to only defend hands that will have, let's say, 22% equity. Now this looks a lot more like the GTO solution, that all of these hands will be faults. Going back to the GTO solution, yeah, so all of these hands will be faults. And now if we apply ICM on top of this, okay, let's look at the call. And how wide? Let's see, guys. Okay, let me see if there are more questions. Nicola asks, do you use this software while playing online? No, I use it for study, just to understand the concepts, and then you apply it on the tables. And the best way to apply it is something like what we're just gonna do an exercise right now. So let's look at this, right? All of these hands in green are calling hands, okay? So let's try to build a range here. What do you guys think in this situation with big blind defending against under the gun? Okay. From these hands, what hands would you start removing first? Let's see if you can guys give me some ideas from this grid. What hands would you start folding? Okay, we have some, yeah, okay. King XS Chuck, King XX. What is the weakest king you will defend? Okay, we have 5-3, we have 7-5, yeah. So 5-3, 6-4, 7-5, 8-5, 9-6, Jack-7, even 10-7. All of these Queen X, right? So difficult to realize the equity. King 2-0 says, yeah, what will be the weakest king X that you think you should be defending against under the gun in this situation? King 6, King 7, King 9. Yeah, I'll probably say King 9 because at least King 9 can flop some straights, right? And what about the offsuit Ace X? Do you think you can get away with defending all of these Ace X in the final table? Yeah, drop Ace 6 through Ace 9 says Alan, and Matt Ace 5 and Ace 10. Yeah, keep Ace 5. That'll make some sense. Maybe remove this and probably remove this as well. So yeah, it's just start to think about it, right, guys? It becomes more natural, to start to get rid of a lot of these hands, right? And yeah, so now we're at the final table, right? Now we're folding 48%, while before we're only folding 26%, right? And yeah, you could even make a case for start to fold some of these suited hands that will be even difficult to realize, like a lot of these. So it depends on how bad the situation is for you. For example, if under the gun has, let's say, 60 big blinds, you have 20, right? And there are 3 players, we have something like 8, 10, and 12 big blinds. Now you're like, okay, I just cannot defend a lot of these hands because, yeah, you're gonna flop a flush draw, and can you really just like check jam the flush draw? Can you flop it? It becomes a lot more dicey, right? So now you start to follow more of these hands, and when you realize it, you start also removing a lot of these offset connectors, and you just have to be so tight depending on the actual stacks distribution at the table. And this has something to do with risk premium. So let me see if I can. Okay. So from my book, risk premium is the extra amount of equity that your hands will need so that you can play them profitably. It's sort of what I just explained. Risk premium comes from ICM, and something that is very useful is this risk premium correlation matrix, which you can screenshot. And for example, when you have a big stack, this is for preflop, a big stack against a big stack situation, you have to be so tight because you need to have an extra 18 to 25% equity to be able to call off or stack off preflop. So pretty much when you're big stack against big stack in a final table, you just cannot stack off anything but the nuts, ace and kings, and that's pretty much about it. And then when you have something like short stack against big stack, right? For example, you need to have 7 to 10 to 10% extra equity in your hands. So all the hands that don't have, let's say you estimate that you need, for example, 33% equity to stack off, right? So now what you do is you just add this to the equity. So let's say you need to have, according to the pot odds, you need to have 33% equity to call. Well, according to risk premium, if you're short stack against short stack, now you will need 40% equity to stack off, or 40 to 43% equity to stack off. This is how this is used. So you need to add this much equity on top of the actual hand you have for the pot odds, and of the equity your actual hand has for the pot odds. So for pre-flop, this risk premium correlation matrix is pretty useful. And now for post-flop, going back to the situation here. Now let's reverse the situation, okay? Let's imagine you are the chip leader on the big blind, right? And now you have, let's say, 70 big blinds. There are a few short stacks, again, with a couple guys with 10 big blinds, one with 15, and a few other stacks like 20, 30 or something, right? So under the gun has 20 big blinds, he raises. You are the chip leader in the big blind. How wide can you defend against the min raise? Let's see what you guys have to say in the chat. Going back to the grid here, look at this chart. Okay, what hands from this chart would you be adding to the big blind defending range? Do you think the big blind can defend wider? If so, what hands would you be adding here? Matt is asking about the risk premium correlation matrix. Is this one? So we have short stack here. Oh, back. Short stack against short stack. You need 10 to 10% extra equity, but this is for pre-flop, for stacking of pre-flop. This correlation matrix. Now this here, what we are looking at is calling to take the flop, to play post flop. So again, same situation. You are facing a min raise, but now you are the chip leader on the big blind with something like 70 big blinds. Okay. Okay, so come on, guys, in the chat. Imagine the final table where a short stack with 20 big blinds raises. You have 70 big blinds on the big blind, and there are a few short stacks around. How wide can you defend? See more answers. Okay, I probably should have set this, get a hand example so it looks easier. So just imagine the numbers here. You are in the big blind with 70 big blinds, a few short stacks, and you have to call a min raise against the guy who has 20. Yeah, we cover him, very well covered. And this is the GTO range. Well, if the under the gun player is opening a regular range, you can actually defend like any two cards. You can defend anything. Yeah, so if the player raising under the gun, he's opening his standard range, GTO range, right? You can defend any two cards because now he will not be able to effectively bluff, right? So he cannot push you so easily off your equity, right? If he has a bluff, it will be very difficult for him to go bet, right? Imagine he has a middle stack like 30 people, it's even more difficult, right? So the way the in position player can leverage his range strength, he cannot put a lot of pressure on you because you have all the chips, you're in the big blind, right? So sometimes you're just gonna flop like a weak pair, right? And he's gonna check back the flop, then or see the flop, you check call, then he checks back turn, and then you just check river and you win with a small pair. Well, if you are the short stack and the big stack is the player in position, the racing player, he can put so much pressure on you and make you fall middle pairs, small pairs, right? But if you are the big stack on the big blind, you defend wide. And now this guy, he cannot barrel effectively because there's a few short stacks, right? And also you get to check raise more aggressively your bluffs. You can bluff him as well in some situations. And that's exactly, you can bully him. You can put a lot of pressure on him. You are the chip leader defending the big blind. So another takeaway from this, if the chip leader is on the big blind or the button, you cannot min raise too many hands. You have to take down, you have to cut the bottom of your range because now, well, you just cannot bluff this guy properly post flop. And a lot of the EV from the weaker hands in your range comes from bluffing, given the strength of your range. Now, your bluffing ability gets reduced a lot when you're the racing player, when the big blind calls and he defends. You just cannot pushing off hands, so you have to be tighter when you min raise as well. Okay. Yeah, Martin says that the players can adjust their ranges. That is exactly what I'm talking about. So, if you're the big blind and you're a big stack, players cannot open their standard ranges against you They have to be tighter because they cannot bluff as effectively post flop. They have to be tighter. If they're opening standard ranges, you can just call it into cards because they will not be able to force you off your equity. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna give you a overview or wrap around to finish this session. I know it was very theoretically heavy. You can rewatch the replay later, and for the next week, I will bring some actual hand examples, and then it will be a lot easier for us to internalize the concepts once we see it happening with actual hands, right? So pre-flop, given ICM, right? You have to be tighter when you push or when you call. You have to be tighter if you're getting all in pre-flop. If you're getting all in pre-flop against a player, you can use this risk premium matrix and be like, okay, let's say middle stack against big stack, you need extra 30 to 15% equity. So if given the pot odds, you need something like 20% equity, for example, to make a call, now you might need 35% equity to make a call when you have a middle stack against a big stack in a final table or an ICM situation, right? Now, this is pre-flop. And also looking at this, yeah, so comparing calling off small blind from the big blind in a ICM situation compared to a GPV situation, you just have to be so much tighter. So in general, pre-flop be tighter. But the main takeaway for when defending the big blind against min raises is if you cover your opponent, let's say you have a middle stack, your opponent has a short stack, and you think he's not adjusting properly and he's not opening like super tight, you think he's opening a regular range, you can just defend a GPV sort of GPV range like this one. But if you are the chip leader, if you have so many chips that you have your opponent well covered and there are a few short stacks around, now you can just call it into cards because he will not be able to push you off your equity. On the other hand, if you are racing into the chip leader who's on the big blind or on the bottom, because the bottom can also gets also to call a lot of hands. If the chip leader is on the bottom or in the big blind, you have to be extremely careful and tight and fold the bottom of your racing range pre-flop. When you are min racing or racing to 2.5x or whatever, you just have to fold the bottom hands in your range and be very careful because you will not be able to push him around. And so, yeah, just be tighter in general a lot when your opponent covers you, and don't play many hands that have very poor playability because you will end up flopping trash a lot of the time, and then you're sometimes going to flop a weak hand, which your opponent will be able to get you to fold by the river. Even good hands, he will be able to get you to fold by the river. So in reality, you're only going to get to showdown when you flop a very strong hand, which is very low percentage of the time. All right. So these are the main concepts. Let's see what you can know. Yeah, if your opponents don't know ICM, this still can apply. Like for example, well, if your opponents don't know or don't understand ICM, then they will be making other mistakes. But if they don't understand ICM, you, for example, cannot bully around a player who doesn't understand ICM because he will just call you with some, crazy hands. And what happens there is that he will be making a mistake, and the mistake that he's making will cost him money, but it will also cost you money. Let's say, for example, here, blind versus blind, you get to push 58% hands, right? In general. And the big blind is only supposed to call 37% in a GPV situation, and in an ICM situation, he can only call 28%, right? But if your opponent is bad and he doesn't care, or he doesn't care about ICM, and let's say he calls even wider than this, right? Now you have to be a lot tighter. If your opponent is calling 33%, you have to be a lot tighter. And a lot of the hands that you could shove before now are negative jams. It's actually Yeah. So it's now are going to be negative jams, losing money plays because he's calling. Now what happens is that he's not making money. No, he's making a mistake. You see all of these hands he's calling are negative EV. So he's calling wider than he should. He's losing money, but he is also costing you money, and the money that you to lose goes to the other players. That's what happens when you are playing against a player who doesn't understand ICM. Yeah, the ICM, all of this is for tournaments. When you're playing cash games, yeah, you also have to be wary about equity realization post flop when you defend your big blind, but it's not as but you don't have to put on top of the equity realization the fact that you will be even harder for you to realize your equity because of the ICM. That's for tournaments. All right, so yeah, this was it for this lecture. Okay, there is another very large question here. So let's see. So much, Michael, coach. It's even tough material. Oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm glad that you like it so much. Yeah, this content is maybe sometimes tough. You might need to rewatch the webinar a couple times to be able to absorb all of it. I know it's very dense. But yeah, next time we'll see some actual hand examples, and that will definitely help interiorize all of the concepts. Right. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate having you around, and thank you for being part of pokercoaching.com. See you next time. What software do you recommend for a study? Well, it depends. I think Hold'em Resources Calculator, this one for tournaments, for rejamming and open jamming ranges is probably the most important tool you can get. All right. Yep. Okay. See you guys. Cheers. Next time. Bye bye.